Welcome to the Cloud Native Testing Podcast. I'm Ole Lensmar, your host, and I've spent years building testing tools like SoapUI and Swagger, and now I'm the CTO at TestCube, where we're redefining testing for the cloud native landscape. In this podcast, we invite people in the space to discuss with us the challenges, solutions, and best practices for testing in Kubernetes and beyond, covering automation, CI/CD, GitOps, and more. This podcast is proudly sponsored by TestCube. If you're interested about how to test cloud-native applications and infrastructure, subscribe and stay tuned. Now let's dive into the episode. Thank you for joining. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Cloud Native Testing Podcast. I'm thrilled and happy to be joined today by Joe Karlsson, or Karlsson, as we say in Sweden, who's at Cloud Query. Joe, it's great to have you here. Over to you.
Hey, first of all, thanks for having me. Second, great intro. I always feel I never know what to do with my hands. I know this is a podcast, audio medium, but I just feel like
hard.
Awkward. But that is so good. But yes, I'm a developer advocate, software engineer, working in the cloud space for forever. A lot of data space too, honestly.
Okay.
MongoDB, et cetera. But anyway, this podcast that you guys are starting to ramp up here caught my eye, and I was like, I don't know. This seems like something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I was like, I would love to come out and chat with you about it.
Really appreciate that. I think just testing in cloud native, testing is obviously something that's been around for a while, but I feel like when I talk to people and when you go to conferences, how people think about testing in the context of cloud native, some are like, well, is there really a difference? And some are like, there's a big difference. And so I really just to kind of explore kind of how different people's takes on that. So I'm obviously super excited to hear your take on it since you're also in the space.
Oh yeah, no, totally. I agree. And it varies from company to company and like what your model is. Like, can you deploy it locally at all? Like, is it purely in the cloud? And if it's like purely in the cloud, like that looks a lot different. I was just even reading this morning about like best practices for GitHub Actions too. I always have, and like, I love GitHub Actions. They're super nice, but they are a pain to debug. And I've been trying to figure out ways to even get them to run more locally so I can like kind of get insights into them more because they're just breaking in the most random spots and it takes
it's interesting because
forever
I've seen
to
more and more people kind of, we've been doing GitHub Actions for a while. And now to your point, into both shift left maybe kind of things, and they want to run, once again, in the context of testing, run tests locally while during their development coding loop. And how does GitHub Actions fit into that, or can it even do that?
Mm-hmm.
And then also shifting right, to maybe move to a more asynchronous pipeline. And people have heard me talk about this before, and how does, with Argo and GitOps and all of that, and how does GitHub Actions fit into that? So it's interesting to kind of see how, and then obviously how testing is impacted both from a, execution, planning, et cetera, perspective. But I know you're into governance as well. So I was keen to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm okay. The reason I thought I'd come on too is I've been recently working a lot with companies who are integrating cloud governance testing into their like CI/CD pipelines, or even just trying to test it for a lot of different reasons. But if you're like new to cloud governance, it's basically a set of policies, controls, and compliance measures you can put on your cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And most companies are using it for like security, making sure, like FinOps, trying to save money on their cloud, and then making sure they're kind of operationally efficient. So basically it's just like rules and guardrails around your cloud environment. And I'm seeing a lot of companies now integrating cloud governance measures into their CI/CD or just testing pipelines in general. And I agree. I like shifting left is great too. I know like integrating with like GitHub hooks or whatever too, or your Git hooks. I always like end up skipping them because they take forever to just do everything. But I'm like, we're trying to figure out like faster and better ways to do it locally and sooner so you don't blow anything up. But yeah, the big thing too is for like companies who have like super complex cloud infrastructure, it can be really easy to, make some changes in YAML files that break your compliance for like SOC 2 compliance. And a lot of people are just kind of like testing it or like addressing it after they've blown their compliance or kind of broken something, which I want to try to avoid.
It's very common to start testing afterwards, right? After the disaster.
Well, especially cloud. I feel like there's still kind of a differentiation. It's like another, and especially like if you're at a big company, it probably is someone else's job to manage that cloud deployment. And like as a software engineer working on that or building the test stuff for that, it can feel like that. I worked for Best Buy, which was at the time like one of the top 3 biggest US e-commerce sites. Yeah, it was like we would just chuck it over a wall and have someone deal with our code and make sure it like didn't fall over. And it would have been honestly good for us to kind of have more of those checks sooner, especially like when we were dealing with like credit card information or other person identifiable information. You want to make sure you're not really doing anything that's going to become a liability.
If I'm like building a cloud application and I'm inspired by this and I want to get started with cloud governance testing, where do I start? Are there standards or like best practices or policies that I can start applying?
There are, what is it? The AWS has what is it called? AWS has like a set of standards. Most clouds have like a excellency kind of security thing. I'll have to look it up what it is here.
Mm-hmm.
But also it depends too what the kind of data you're doing, what your goals are. I think of like, obviously like SOC 2 is probably one a lot of people are trying to go after. But we're finding too that because customers have such unique cloud environments and they're using so many different cloud providers like GitHub and especially SOC 2, like all of your third-party tools have to get evaluated. Like your AWS control centers or whatever aren't going to be enough to like make sure that it's not that data is not all in one place. So trying to consolidate that too. I'm even seeing like Wise just wrote a report too about like how they're seeing governance trying to get centralized because it's just getting spread out so thin. Trying to just get visibility into it can be really difficult. It depends what you're trying to do. I think there's lots of different tools to do lots of different things. Wise is really great for CSPMs or kind of security measures. Highly biased plug, but I work for a company called Cloud Query. We're a cloud governance tool, and we allow you to pull in cloud data from any cloud provider all into one place and run queries and kind of set up integrations with that data, which a lot of huge companies are using.
Okay. So is that governance, what are you specifically looking at? Is it kind of how you're working with data or how are you kind of exposing stuff? I'm just curious to kind of dig in a little bit more detail.
Yeah. I mean, lots of different things. I think the biggest things we're seeing people using us for is like security, like seeing if there's one of the big things with cloud testing is cloud drift. One of the use cases I worked on recently using Cloud Query for a customer was determining cloud drift. So like running snapshots in every single deployment, checking to see if their cloud infrastructure has changed, and then setting up a flag and stopping that, or like setting a notification up that the cloud either permissions change or so like looking at historical data, kind of snapshotting that, and then looking at the new deployment and seeing if like any of the security permissions or cloud infrastructure has changed significantly. You can setting up alerts too for like massive changes or over provisioned resources or permission to different resources, or even like they also set up things too, like if they had expired SSL certs or S3 buckets that were exposed, you could kind of, they were doing checks during the deployment process to make sure that they were still compliant, and it would block a deployment depending on how severe the infraction was or whatever, right, without approval.
And you would automate that from your pipeline in some way,
yes,
I guess.
They actually, speaking of GitHub Actions, they were using GitHub Actions and then making that part of their flow. I mean, with some of that too, right? It's got to be fast and performant, and it's got to be up to date, and it's got to be quick to make those comparisons too. Again, we just use SQL. You can use SQL to write custom queries. The thing too is like, because every company has such like complex and specific and unique cloud infrastructure too. You want to make sure they're SAN compliant and whatever kind of unique combination you're using. But that ended up working really well for them. And there's lots of different ways you could do that too. But I think that the sooner you can get that right, like we need to shift that over sooner and sooner and sooner. Like a deployment process is really great, and it's going to stop you from like catastrophic cloud issues that testing could have solved up front. Yeah, I mean, the testing and production, I think, just like isn't. We can't really do it anymore. Yeah, exactly. I know there's lots of different ways to do that. I'm curious too. I know like setting up like cloud native development environments is becoming more and more popular too, right? Like especially when making a cloud application, you're just developing in Visual Studio Code, but you're actually developing in a little sandbox in a Kubernetes cluster, AWS or whatever.
Speaking, testing and production is something we've touched on in previous episode. It's one of those things that everyone says you should do it, but most people we talk to on our end do it. It's not the only thing they do. It's not the only way they test, but it's kind of, we schedule our end-to-end functional test to run once an hour or once a day, just to make sure nothing slips through the cracks. And I can kind of buy that because you never know, right? Someone goes, I have to hotfix something, and you update some environment variable or whatever, and then you forget to what that ripple effects that might have. So could you also do governance testing like in production in that way,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
is that something you see people doing?
Absolutely. And I mean, you nailed it. I feel like it is a do as I say, not as I do type situation. And we're like, as engineers are under like, and product teams are under pressure to get stuff out faster than ever these days with less and less resources. We've been seeing big cuts in tech, but like there's still an expectation to maintain velocity and get that stuff out. Yeah, it does happen. I do think that does happen. I think it's part of it. And I think you're absolutely right. Getting like testing in a pipeline as you're deploying is probably as a one place to go. Like testing stuff's going to slip through the cracks, and you're going to need more like in-depth testing too. And most of our users honestly use us for kind of doing alerting, notifications, and kind of admin dashboards and kind of one overview of their entire cloud cluster. So doing policy checks, every hour to make sure they're still compliant or nothing's exposed, or I'm writing a post today or writing an example about like testing for deprecated services. So like if you're running a Lambda cluster with an old version of Python, that puts a security risk for those Lambda functions. That's something that a pipeline isn't going to be able to find, right? 'Cause that could happen. If you're not deploying, it's something could still be
And how does Cloud Query then work? Does it deploy like an agent into your infrastructure to kind of verify stuff, or does it look at from the outside? Or
you ever like sometimes spend too much time with something and you forget like, oh yeah, it's
how does it actually work?
what is it? Yeah, you have to explain what it is. Yeah, me neither. That never happens to me either. No. So we're read only into your different cloud databases, but most cloud services provide APIs. We access those APIs and we stream them into we just released a new platform, and we stream it into a database, and we allow you to make those queries on there too. But we have like massive users that are using it for super complex use cases. They tend to use Cloud Query because it is more flexible than any other tool. It allows you to integrate it, and it's super lightweight and fast.
Okay,
which is nice. But yeah, it's a streaming cloud tool accessing APIs and.
Okay, so we're talking like in the CD, in the deployment phase, or maybe the infrastructure phase. Is there something you do earlier on, or if you're like a developer building your microservices for your cloud application, is there a governance aspect that you shift left with your governance, or is it something that usually does come later on in the cycle?
That's a good question. Okay, this may be This is like the not cool part about it, and it typically isn't really even a tech problem. It tends to be more like a personnel problem, because I think like, especially if you're managing a large team with like complex cloud infrastructure, you want to try to get your engineers to like not over provision and like over like spend cloud resources and try to save some money and try to make sure everything's secure. I do think like creating a cloud governance culture at a certain point is probably a good idea, and trying to make it the entire, because I think the problem too, and I've seen this firsthand, is you try to make a specific team, like for example, like a web performance team or something, like the expectation then on the other engineers is, oh, I don't have to worry about that. Somebody else is going to start worrying about that. And it really does have to become someone like testing, especially with like if you're deploying to cloud, it has to be kind of everyone's problem. Otherwise, they're not going to care about it, or kind of it's the tragedy of the commons. Just kind of make it someone else have to worry about it. I do think something helps too is making those resources available and kind of showing that like these are, the most expensive resources. These are the ones that are being flagged, or like trying to make notification systems that alert those people that there are issues with that, and then escalating that up the chain too. So I think trying to make those like securely exposing resources to your developers to make, and then do trainings and work and trying to like make a culture around it, I think is one of the best ways to do that. I know that's not the cool answer. And most of the problem is like most of the time it's you kind of just have to talk about it and try to figure out a way to do that. I do think though, something that we've seen people using Cloud Query for too is because it's read only, and you can create kind of dashboards and notifications for that. People are able to make expose or like share parts of their cloud infrastructure without having to like be a security risk or give overly permissive like IAM roles to your engineers to access their dashboards and consoles, but kind of making a safe place where they can kind of see that data that they need to see to make sure that they're staying in the rules, or they didn't deploy anything that's not breaking SOC 2 compliance or HIPAA violation or personally identifiable information or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of like you want them to feel the pain of maybe also kind of,
A
so
little
they kind
bit.
of take a little bit of responsibility for fixing it. It's like, it's like raising a child. You don't isolate them too much from the problems. Actually, let them feel some of the pain so that hopefully they'll learn from that.
Yeah. You want a little heat from the oven, but not too much. And here's the thing too, you want them to feel the pain without slowing down their velocity. Like, I think too, like the shift left thing works great too. But if you're like, I recently worked on a project too, where like we had a git commit hook and it would run these massive, our entire testing stack, and it took a minute every time I did a commit. And like that just led to me just running like no verify and then less commits, which is not good. I want to be like faster and still feel it a little bit too. And I think trying to like share that, I think is great too. And that's a balance, and depends on kind of what you're doing and kind of how your testing structure looks and how fast and performant everything is. But I feel like those are kind of the big balance I feel.
But I think, I mean, you touched on this. It With so many things, it does go back to culture, right?
Yep.
And there has to be big, I mean, specifically around testing and around a lot of things, obviously, but that's maybe one of the big challenges. How do you build a culture for quality awareness and quality concern and quality first? And it's easy to talk about, and you talk about it on your offsite meetings, and everyone's, thumbs up, but then you go back and you're happy to code. And so that's, I mean, I've seen it so many times, and I'm sure you have also, is this just disconnect between what you want to do, and I think what everyone thinks is the right thing to do, but then what you actually do. And I don't know how to ingrain that culture, if it's just you need someone policing, I mean, in a good way, or I don't know.
Benevolent dictator.
Yeah. Something like that. And
Yeah.
always leading by example, and maybe like we said earlier, sharing the pain when the culture isn't. I don't know.
I know. That's the thing too. I'm curious to see. I mean, like obviously you have a lot of experience with like testing too. I don't know if I have the answer for that either. Like, I mean, notifications, obviously people start just droning out if they get too many or it's not personalized to them. Public shaming stuff is probably not great either. But getting notified of like things that are going on personally to you that you would care about, and then having to escalate that up if things are notified quickly, I think is probably
maybe some kind of zero tolerance culture, saying that whenever there's a bug, an issue, that everything else gets pushed aside and we have to fix that first.
Mm-hmm.
And then engineers are going to be so annoyed by having to fix their own bugs that they'll just make sure they get it right the first time. But that's not going to play well with the business always, because you say we can't always be distracted. I don't know what the right thing is.
I know, that's the thing. Yeah, I always feel like I have to fight for bug fixes and kind of fixing tests. And I always feel like it's a negotiation with the business, with like taking on tech debt and when are we going to start paying that back and how much time do we get to pay that back. And I do feel like it's a difficult branding battle.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I'm not saying it's not worth it, but it's just, and it's a healthy friction.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the, I don't know, game is the wrong word, but part of part of this space, or I don't know, space, but just part of the life cycle.
It's part of the job.
It's part of the job, and there's always going to be bugs, and there's always going to be issues. But trying to find that balance, but I think the culture is really important to really still not. To be mindful and putting some concern to quality. And then ultimately, obviously, if bugs are affecting customers or business deals, then that'll also be easier to get buy-in from the business to maybe prioritize bugs and technical debt versus features.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Yeah. The other and developer frustration too. Like, you don't want like blockers. Like, you don't want a hard fail on every single infraction. Like a soft fail might be good too. And pie in the sky dream, it would even be like recommended fixes for that, like a linter, right? Like kind of like, here's what you broke, or here's what's broken here. Here's how to fix it. Some tools have that too, but
and I'm sure AI has a role to play here as well.
I know. Well, that's the dream, right? Like, and I don't think we're quite there yet. And I don't know if I would trust an AI with like protecting
governance
and monitoring. I think it would be good for like highlighting stuff, and I think that'll get better. I mean, that's my dream. I want like a Jarvis inside all my cloud console. I want like a like Omni present and all my cloud consoles and make recommendations to me and have like a context of what the business is and like auto fix it.
That would be awesome.
I don't think we're there. I don't think I would trust that anytime soon either. In the meantime, though, I think like making some soft suggestions and fixes and remediation steps too, those are getting better. I'm even seeing that like in Cursor and GitHub Copilot are getting better at those auto remediation
And one of the
steps.
The previous guests was working at a company where they have a tool where they teach an AI like best practices and like rules around software, right? So, and then they would basically add that then to pull requests, which would then point out like this might be violating certain governance rules, but at the code level, and then it would continuously be learning from the code itself, kind of what are the best practices there. So maybe that's an interesting kind of as a co-pilot, not to write code specifically, but just to kind of audit your code and tell you when you're not compliant with whatever standards or rules that you've defined inside your company. So
exactly. I think that's usually what I see too, like from a governance perspective, typically that starts with like a governance team or kind of board. Again, these are for like huge, massive, complex cloud infrastructures, but kind of defining what those rules are and kind of standards, and making written documents about that. But yeah, if you could train something to go and like figure that out,
I think that was
incredible.
Specifically, they would then point the AI at those written documents, and then it would kind of try to apply that to code or whatever.
Yeah,
that's interesting. The word governance can, I think, just scare people away just by the just governance sounds heavy, and governing boards, and there's people kind of meeting, and nobody really wants to be there. But in reality, I don't think it has to be that. So what would you say to people that feel like that, and how would you kind of sell it to them or make
honestly too, I think people don't consider kind of a tool like Cloud Query until they start feeling the pain of like, especially when they're doing like multi-cloud, they're having like to go to like multiple places to kind of do the same thing. So it ends up becoming like, how do we fix this thing that is painful for us and like involves a lot of work to get this to like do what we want, and we just wanted to like centralize it a little bit more. So I mean, like, and most of the time, it kind of starts small and it kind of evolve and grow as kind of change demands and frustrations grow with your policies and kind of adjusting what that looks like. But most people, it's just frustrating to have to like go and try to figure out and make consistent environments across, all these different cloud tools we're all using. Yeah, and I feel like that might be, like the best place to start too. Like if you have a frustration with it, like trying to figure out what the tool is to do that, or a concern, or for me as an anxious man, I'm just like, what's keeping me up? What wakes me up at 2 a.m. and how do I like try to figure out a tool or how to get visibility into something that's driving me nuts or makes me nervous that I may not have visibility on? Yeah, I don't know.
And do you think like what's the maturity for governance in the CNCF at large? Do you think there's a governance moment waiting to happen, or is it still early?
It might still be early. I feel like it is getting popular, especially like because we're seeing companies like, I'm not seeing a consolidation on tools and clouds. Like we're all using GitHub, we're all using these different things and all these different like compliance that like in the EU, right? Like banks are now required to like audit all of their third-party tools. We're seeing more and more legislation around third-party tools and like sprawling tools, and there's not really a shortage of SaaS and like databases services right now. I think that is the dream of the big core hyperscaler cloud providers, to be the all-in-one tool, but it just isn't quite there yet. Yeah, I think it's growing mostly from just a need to get visibility to provide these different services, especially if they need to stay compliant. And these tend to be larger companies or larger providers or people who are like managing lots of different services. We have some smaller startups too that are using us, that are just using an insane amount of different services too.
But to that point, I mean, something that we see on our end with TestCube, that it's maybe not always something that you would start off with at a small startup, but then eventually you'll grow into that need, or you'll start feeling the pains. And is it the same for you, or would you say you can start, or even if you're a small startup and you're just building your first thing, at what point in your life cycle does it make sense to add kind of a governance aspect to it?
I mean, the dull answer is it depends, I think. And for what I'm seeing too is it's usually people who have like a specific need or something they need to do. Like we need to like get access to our, we need to get visibility into our billing across things, or we need to, actually we're nervous that Python 3.8 is going to be deprecated soon. We need to make sure that all of our different functions across different environments are all being upgraded. If you're trying to like, it's just like difficult things trying to get them solved and keep them solved long term. I don't know. Yeah, we've seen two different models. It's either people who are coming in who are like scaling up and having a hard time kind of managing that, or companies who are massive and huge. Or we have a lot of companies who are like in the fintech or government space too that are
where there is,
compliance
they're
needs,
regulated,
new regulation. Like I mentioned too, the EU just had that new legislation for banks. And so that was like a lot of interest there for trying to make sure they're staying compliant.
Okay, awesome. Joe, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so
Yes.
much. Awesome to learn. I wasn't aware of all the governance, and it's been super helpful. And hopefully people listening have learned a lot too. And thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. This was so fun.
Great. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye-bye.